So one of the interesting things about Jesuit history and its sort of beginnings in the 16th century is the way Jesuits address the missions. There are two things. There's a tendency to try and understand the culture into which they were going, because again, from the spiritual exercises, you go into the door of the person you're trying to reach and you bring them out your own door to bring them to Christ. So the ability to know the language, know the culture, know the good things that need to be conserved in a culture, and the things that were considered to be sinful that needed to be challenged, were a lot of the initial information gathering that the early Jesuit missions did. The tendency is to think that the Jesuits were more encultured than anyone else. And that is probably true, but it doesn't mean that they left European culture or European ideas completely behind. So there was still, the mission was still to bring a faith that was Christian and Catholic and effectively European, but to do it in a way that was more open to the other cultures. And again, it depended a great deal on the level of the culture, the kind of culture they found. To go as a missionary to the Americas, to Asia, to Africa, was a risk. Even though transportation had improved incredibly in the course of the 16th century, it was still a very risky proposition. There were pirates, there were navigation problems, there were storms, there were the diseases that you can find on board a ship. So much so that many missionaries didn't make it to their destination. If they made it to their destination, they usually didn't return home. They often didn't survive in the missions for very long. So it was the desire to go to the missions and the willingness to go very much fits into the spiritual exercises, because it was really an openness and indifference to a life that could be extremely difficult, brutal, and short. So the courage of these missionaries is worth noting. The motivation, the only motivation that they can have, was from the spiritual exercises, the following of Christ, doing the will of Christ. If you went to the missions with the idea of becoming a saint or a hero, chances are you wouldn't do it. It wouldn't arrive. So the motivations really come out of the spiritual exercises, the openness to use whatever was available and created things to help with that mission was important as well. One of the best examples of that was the use of astronomy by the missionaries in China to discuss and interact with astronomers in that country as a real way of getting into the courts of the elite and being able to then have an influence on spreading the gospel among the population. So there were all sorts of methods that were used, and the Jesuits were open to trying all sorts of different missiologies. It would become a conflict within the church in the 18th century when other missionary groups began to see that the Jesuits were perhaps compromising too much with the Chinese rites or the Malabar rites, where Chinese or Indian culture begins to be incorporated into what was very much a Catholic European kind of expression of the faith. So that's an important aspect of missiology as sort of emerging in some ways out of the spiritual exercises.